I had been warden of the Caliph Quarter for 19 years, which is another way of saying I had been nobody for 19 years, which is yet another way of saying I had gotten exactly what I wanted. The Caliph Quarter was the oldest district in Voronsport. Cobblestone lanes that hadn't been releveled since the colonial surveyors laid them. Buildings whose facades still bore the carved crests of families that had been dead for 2 centuries. The Inquisitor-Assessors called it a preservation zone. That meant they left it alone, which meant I was left alone inside it, which suited me well enough. I managed 14 residential blocks for commercial premises and one decommissioned civic fountain that nobody had gotten around to removing. I fixed what broke. I kept records. I collected the quarterly maintenance tithe and forwarded it to the district office without skimming, which made me unusual among wardens in this part of Voronsport, though no one had ever thought to compliment me on it. I was 61 years old. I had a cot, a workbench, a kettle, and a window that looked out onto the drainage culvert that ran along the base of Block 7. I had stopped wanting things some years back, and I had found that easier than wanting had ever been. That was the condition I was in when I found the child. It was the hour before first light on the 43rd day of the cold season. I was doing my rounds. The culverts backed up when the rains came in from a bay, and it was my job to check the drainage grates before the water found somewhere it wasn't supposed to go. I had my lamp, my probe rod, my waterproof log. I had done this particular circuit 612 times. I was not expecting anything. She was wedged between the great housing and the culvert wall, and the gap where the old stonework had shifted out of true. Small, very small. Her skin was the color of pale slate, and her ears came to delicate points, and her eyes, when she opened them and looked up at me, were a gold so deep they were almost copper. She was Aravan. I knew that before I knew anything else, because I had lived in this port long enough to know who came through it and what they looked like, and because knowing was part of my job, even when it was the kind of knowing that was easier not to act on. The Aravan had been reclassified 8 months ago. Reclassified is the district office's word. What it meant in practice was that they were no longer permitted residency in the lower colonial sectors, that any found sheltering unlicensed Aravan persons would forfeit their warden certification, and that the Inquisitor-Assessors had standing authority to remove any Aravan individuals encountered during routine district sweeps. The sweep was scheduled for the Caliph Quarter in 4 days. I had the notice pinned above my workbench. I had read it 3 times and understood it completely. She was holding something in her closed fist, a small copper winding key, the kind used to wind clockwork civic instruments, water clock mechanisms primarily. I had 2 such instruments in my care in this very quarter. How she had come by one, I could not begin to guess. I stood there in the dark with my lamp and my probe rod and my log, and I thought about the notice on my workbench, and I thought about the sweeps in 4 days, and I thought about what 19 years of being nobody had cost me, and what it had given me. And I picked her up. She weighed nothing. That is not an exaggeration. She was so light that I checked my grip twice because I was afraid I would miscalculate and drop her. She did not make a sound. She looked at me with those copper eyes and held her winding key and waited to see what I would do next. I brought her inside. I put her on my cot with a wool blanket around her and gave her a cup of warm broth, which she accepted with both hands, careful and precise, as though the cup were a formal gift that required acknowledgement. She did not speak. I don't think she had any of my language yet, but she watched everything I did with an attention that was almost uncomfortable, the way a much older person watches a thing they're trying to understand before they commit to it. I gave her the name Wren, which was the name of a very small bird that had lived in the ornamental ironwork of Block 9 3 years ago, and which I had enjoyed watching without ever telling anyone. She seemed to accept this. The next 4 days were the most deliberate of my life. I was methodical. I have always been methodical. It was the one trait that had reliably served me. I moved her meals to hours that wouldn't coincide with resident traffic. I covered the window. I brought out a brass astrolabe from my repair cabinet that I had been reassembling over the course of 6 months, and I set it on the workbench where she could see it. And she sat beside me and watched my hands, and after a time, she began pointing at pieces I'd set aside, and then at the empty sockets where they belonged. She was right almost every time. She was teaching me how to learn her, the same way I was teaching her to trust the sound of my step on the landing. On the morning of the third day, she pressed the winding key into my palm and closed my fingers around it. Just that. No explanation I could translate. I held it, and I looked at her, and I felt something shift in me that I did not have a name for. Some weight that had been in place so long I had stopped noticing it, easing. The sweep came on the fourth day, 2 hours before I had anticipated. There were 3 of them. Inquisitor-Assessors in gray coats, with the district classification ledgers under their arms, and the kind of patient, procedural manner that is more frightening than any open hostility, because it has no pity in it and no room for appeal. I met them at the outer gate of Block 7. I had been a warden for 19 years. I knew what was in every room of every building I managed. More importantly, I knew what was in every room that they would think to check and what was not in the one room they would not. My maintenance sub-vault, the one under Block 7's foundation, accessible only through the culvert access hatch behind my workbench, was not on any district floor plan I had ever filed because the floor plan I filed had been drawn from a survey done 40 years before the sub-vault was added, and I had never corrected the discrepancy. I had not known until 3 days ago that I would ever need that discrepancy. I led the assessors through every room on my ledger. I answered every question they put to me. I showed them my warden's log, my maintenance records, my tithe receipts. I was cooperative and precise and gave them absolutely nothing to doubt because I had 19 years of practice at being a man with nothing to hide and nothing of value to anyone. They were at it for 4 hours. When they reached my workshop, one of them paused at my workbench. The astrolabe was there, mostly assembled now, 1 or 2 pieces still loose. The winding key was not there. He asked me what it was. I told him it was a water clock mechanism, which was true. He looked at it for a moment. He wrote something in his ledger. He moved on. They left at midday. I stood at the outer gate and watched them go, and then I went back inside and I sat down on my workbench and I stayed very still for a long time because my hands were shaking and I needed them to stop before I went to the sub-vault. She was there, sitting in the dark with her wool blanket around her, holding the winding key, watching the hatch, waiting. I had made a contact 2 days prior. A freight handler I had done a favor for once a long time ago, who moved goods through the port without asking too many questions about their classification. He owed me. I had never collected. I collected now. It took another 3 days to arrange. The Inquisitor-Assessors did a second pass through the quarter on the second of those days, a standard follow-up, nothing targeted, and I was at my gate again with my ledger and my cooperative manner, and they moved on without stopping. On the 4th morning, before first light, I brought Ren out of the sub-vault and through the service lane behind Block 7 and down to the harbor freight staging area. My freight handler was there with a covered cargo sled and a sealed manifest. He looked at Ren for a moment, those copper eyes, that quiet attention, and then he looked at me and he did not say a word. I respected him for that. I crouched down to her level. She looked at me. I had come to understand, over these days, that she communicated less with sound than with the quality of her attention. The way she held her gaze on a thing told you more than most people's full sentences. She was holding her gaze on me in the way that meant she was memorizing. I pressed the winding key back in her hand. She had given it to me. I was giving it back, hers to carry wherever she was going. She reached out and touched my wrist with one small hand, very briefly. Then she let me go. I watched the sled until it turned out of the lane and was gone. I walked back through the Caliph Quarter in the early gray of the morning, past the civic fountain and the old crests and the stones that hadn't been releveled in 200 years, and I went into my workshop and sat at my workbench, and I finished the astrolabe. The second sweep, the real one, the follow-up they send when a first sweep has been logged but something doesn't sit right, came 6 days later. I was ready for it. I had been ready for it since the morning I pulled her from a culvert. Some costs you calculate in advance. That doesn't make them lighter, but it makes them bearable. The Inquisitor-Assessor who wrote the order against my warden certification was efficient about it. He asked me 3 questions. I answered all 3 truthfully because I was done lying by then, and because the truth that I had sheltered an Aravan child and arranged her transit out of the district was not something I was interested in hiding anymore. He noted it in his ledger. He handed me the revocation order. He was almost at the door when he stopped. He had seen the astrolabe, fully assembled now, running true, its gears turning with the small, clean sound of well-fitted brass. He stood there a moment. Then he left. I don't know where she went. I know she got out. The freight handler told me that much later, when he came to return the money, I had overpaid him. He said she had eaten an entire ration pack on the crossing and had spent most of the journey sitting by the porthole, watching the water. Watching. Always watching. I'm not a warden anymore. I fix things when people bring them to me, and the work is enough. My hands still know how. I have thought, sometimes, about what that small copper winding key meant, whether she was giving it to me as a gift, or as trust, or as something without a name in either of our languages. I have decided it doesn't matter which. She gave it, and I held it, and I gave it back, and she carried it with her. That is the whole of it. She taught me that a man who thinks he is done is only done if he agrees to be. I had agreed for a long time. I don't anymore.